Hello, colleagues, and welcome to the next episode of DINCast, which is one I've been looking forward to for a long, long time now with my disruptive sister, metaphorically speaking, Lucy Adams, who's the founder and CEO of Disruptive HR. Lucy, welcome aboard.
Thank you very much, Ian. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well and really excited to find out a bit more about disruptive HR and I suppose your thoughts around how we build back better organizations and particularly how we can disrupt HR and people services. Some people may know you. You've had a very long and distinguished career, but for those people who don't, do you want
Oh,
to
that
tell us?
makes me sound so old. A long and distinguished career.
I know that. I was thinking there's a coming out of that. Yeah. You should have some sort of letters after your name or something like that as a recognition. Anyhow. But we can edit that out or we can just leave it in as a genuine human. But for those who haven't heard of you, Lucy, tell us a bit about yourself and your leadership journey.
Okay, so I mainly worked in large organizations up until relatively recently. And I kind of ended up in HR. I mean, I don't think, not sure anyone ever really chooses to go into HR. You know, you don't as a young child think, oh, what I really want to do is be an HR director. But I think most of us kind of found our way into it in one way or another. And that so ended up in some big kind of fairly meaty HR roles. People may have heard of Serco, so big outsourcing organization. Ended up at group HR director there, and also HR director of the BBC, which everyone will have heard of in terms of the organization. And then just over 5-6 years ago now, yeah, nearly coming up to six, myself and my business partner Karen Moran, we set up Disruptive HR, and that's what we do now. We run Disruptive HR, which is, really, I suppose, a consultancy, training, advisory organization, which is really about helping leaders and HR people do it differently.
So by calling your business Disruptive HR, in the same way we call the Disruptive Innovators Network, you clearly weren't satisfied with the sort of the existing order. Therefore, you were looking to sort of shake up HR, would be my sort of guess. What were the main areas of, I suppose, that you were wanting to sort of focus on that perhaps weren't working as well as they could?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just generally frustrated that, I was in this profession that seemed to be still offering approaches to problems that were very 1980s. And there I was at the BBC at the time, where we were going through these unbelievable disruptions. I mean, not unique to the BBC, but, when you're in it, you kind of only know your own, don't you? And there we were, with disruptive technologies, pressures on funding, new competitive landscape. You just think about Netflix and Amazon. I don't think you're as old as me, but when I was growing up, it was kind of 3 channels, and then radically we had a 4th channel in the 1980s. Channel 4, huge excitement, and you just completely revolutionized now the way that people consume media. So we had all sorts of changes and challenges, and the pace of change was relentless. And there was I leading a function that was still doing things like the annual appraisal form and the annual engagement survey, and everything felt very process heavy. It just felt irrelevant, and I just got to a place where I just thought, I've got to give it one last try, because I kind of still believed in the people agenda and believed that that was the difference for organizations, but not how I was doing it. So I thought, well, I'll give it one last go. And instead of doing HR in the way that we have been doing, Karen and I set out to find whether HR could be done differently. And the good news is that it absolutely can.
Obviously, as you say, you're coming around your sort of 6th year anniversary around this, and running your own business is very different to working in a business and things like that. So I just wondered what lessons you've learned from moving across from the corporate world.
I mean, everybody I know that has left corporate world, big complex organizations, to run their own thing. Now, I won't say everybody, but I'd say the vast majority of people say they'd never go back. And I think in part it suits a particular type of person. And I think I was always I wanted to move quickly. I would want to challenge the status quo, and I'd get frustrated with people that seemed to be just stuck in the same way of doing things, who weren't open to change. And I got really tired of approval levels, stakeholder management, death by committee. So actually running my own thing was hugely exciting and continues to be. And I, people say, oh, maybe you should have done it earlier, but I think we all do it at the time that's right for us, don't we? And there are huge benefits of working in an organization, particularly like the BBC, the complexity, which is intellectually challenging. You're working with something and you're kind of stewarding something, or trying to steward something that is very dear to people's hearts, and people have a huge pride in working there. So all sorts of, you work with amazing people. However, I just love running my own thing. It's tiring. You're never off. You kind of look around, find somebody to do something for you. And initially it's just you, and you go, oh, okay, from having a team of people, you're having to do everything yourself. It's slightly different now because we've got a bigger team. But what I love about it that I kind of missed when I was in a large organization is Karen and I can make a decision on a Monday and we can be doing it by the Friday.
You touched on an interesting point when you were sort of explaining some of your frustrations of working in the corporate world. And I just wondered, what's your view that stops these bright, intelligent, highly qualified people from challenging some of the processes and the systems that they're working in that aren't making them happy at work? What prevents people from shouting up?
It's a really interesting question, and I think there's multiple reasons. But I think if you've been in an organization for a long time, I think in most large corporates that have a tendency for risk aversion, you soon learn that you will be rewarded for not changing things, and that actually the risk of failure if things go wrong in a large organization, particularly one like the BBC, where you've got huge amounts of media scrutiny and political scrutiny, that actually if you do something that you're experimental, which by definition of experiments, some are going to go wrong, but it does go wrong, then the downside outweigh the up. And so I think very quickly, if you want to stay in a large organization, it's actually easier just to keep your head down. I think it's easier to not challenge. So those leaders that I see in organizations that are challenging, that are trying, I think they're just hugely brave. And I don't think that's necessarily acknowledged. There's organizations that we work with that are increasingly waking up to the idea that you have to celebrate the failures as well as the successes, because if the intention is right and actually people have had the bravery, the courage to experiment, then that should be rewarded in its own right, whether it leads to something successful or not.
Okay, so turning now to the situation that we find ourselves in and leaders do within their organizations, as we're now thinking, okay, the pandemic is potentially going to end at some point in the near future. What do you think are the opportunities for leaders to rethink their HR and people strategies and processes? What really could make a difference to their organization?
Oh, Ian, it's massive. I mean, we hope it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. We hope we don't have to go through this again. But, if you just think, just lockdown, what did that do for opening up to the possibilities of remote working, of collaborating across different time zones and different locations much more easily in some ways because of our access to Zoom? The idea that if we want to communicate with our people, we have to kind of get them all in the one place and do a big formal town hall. And actually, you've got the ability of a leader just to sit there as you are now and just have an informal chat with his people or her people. There's been all sorts of benefits that we've been forced into recognizing because of lockdown. And the good thing is that actually there's a lot of things that when we had to stop them because we weren't in the office, and particularly in the people arena, I don't know, your annual performance review or whatever it might be, nobody missed them. And so it's given us this pause button, this chance to reset what we do and to question the value of the things that we've been doing in the past. look at the things that have worked during lockdown, the informality of leadership, the informal, shorter Zoom calls, the increase in connections, and really kind of think, so are we just going to go back to how it was? Or actually, does this give us an opportunity to do things radically differently? So we keep hearing people talk about, returning to normal. And all of last year, or certainly from sort of, May time of last year, we did a session around better normal. What would better normal leadership look like? Better normal performance look like? Better normal talent management look like? And so on. And I think that really resonated with people, because I think that actually people have kind of, even the diehard resistors have kind of thought, actually, we can't just let things slide back to normal. Of course, there'll be some things that we want to resuscitate and we want to get going again. But equally, there's an awful lot of dross that we just don't want to restart.
And one of those areas is, I suppose, is this issue about how organisations are now spaced, the workplaces they work in terms of we have a distributed sort of network of individuals working at the hub, the home, or roaming about on site kind of thing. I suppose one of the challenges now for executives and boards as well is, how do you understand how the work is now getting done? So, we have conversations about, well, actually, how do I know how well that team is performing, how productive, how efficient they're actually being? So we are now turning to some technological solutions around workplace, people analytics, that will give you some of these sort of metrics around that. But that's not necessarily going to be straightforward to achieve. I just wondered what your view was around how we now can find out how work is getting done.
And I think we have to, first of all, ask the question, are we wanting the answer to how is the work getting done because we genuinely want to measure and for the sake of customer service or productivity improvements? Or is it because we actually can't see people, we don't trust them? And if it's the latter, then I think then we should almost pause before we go down that route, because ultimately, if you haven't clarified the outputs that you want from each role, then it's going to be very hard to measure anyway. So we're seeing this kind of idea of measuring through outputs, managing through outputs, rather than a sense that, well, if I can't see them, then I've got to know, are they putting the hours in? Because if they're putting the hours in, then chances are they're working. Whereas actually we've seen all of our fears about, if I can't see them, their productivity will drop, has not been founded. It's not rooted in reality. The vast majority of people who have been working from home have actually become more productive. We can talk about collaboration, etc., because I think that is an area which is perhaps less easy to manage. But by and large, the idea that we are more productive by commuting a long distance, sitting at our desk in a noisy office, and then going home again. Whereas actually we've got the ability to work from home, particularly with the technologies that are available. So I think if you're wondering about, as a board, how do we know how the work's getting done? If the question is a genuine one, which is about ensuring great customer service, ensuring higher levels of productivity, ensuring innovation, then I think you look at the outputs that you require and measure those. If it's actually being motivated because we don't trust people if we can't see them, then you really need to take a good, long, hard look at yourselves and say, we trust these people with our customers, with each other, with company money. We trust them enough to pay them. And yet we don't trust them if we can't see them, if they're not, we're not micromanaging them. And I don't think that's good enough any longer.
And I suppose one of the other consequences of the world in which we now live in is we're actually going to have to take more seriously the personal and team well-being of the colleagues who we sort of work with, and that's going to be harder in this distributed world. So I just wondered, from a HR perspective, where do you see them having to concentrate to make sure that we are aware of people's well-being and we are helping people before they topple over?
I mean, I think this is one of my bugbears, really, which is the well-being industry has flourished exponentially over the last, particularly sort of 5 years. But unfortunately, I think a lot of what we do as leaders with well-being tends to be kind of putting a sticking plaster on people rather than genuinely looking at the causes of well-being. So if we look at the genuine causes of people who feel fulfilled, valued, motivated, not burning out, but stretched and challenged at the same time, then actually it's things like good leadership, having regular conversations, asking the right questions, leaders as coach, showing your people that you value them, saying thank you, not putting obstacles in their way and making life more difficult for them because of approval processes that are just a nightmare. So I think if we can look at the causes of well-being rather than the Zoom yoga classes or giving them all, Fitbits or whatever it might be, I think ultimately it's about trusting our people, doing the right things by them in terms of the environment that we're creating for them, but equally then trusting them to manage their own well-being. I remember one of my leaders years ago said to me that I was going through a lot of personal difficulties at the time, the usual stuff, divorce, single parent, all of that stuff, and coping with a very busy role. And he said to me at the time, he said, look, I know that you're going through some difficulties. He said, but I'm not going to try and, act like your dad. He said, so you need to know as a grown up, I trust you, but if you need anything, I'm here. So that was the most empowering thing, because it was saying, I'm not going to say, well, I won't add Lucy to that meeting because I'm worried about her well-being, because that would have been really undermining for me. What it did do was say, I'm going to trust you as an adult. And interestingly, there's a great, people can Google it, the IBM Working From Home Pledge. And this is a pledge from the chief exec to all of his people. And it's very simple. And it talks about things like, you don't always have to be camera ready, So the days when we're having a day when we just don't want to be on blooming Zoom, we just want to have a voice call or something. But one of the key things he says in there is, I promise to manage my own well-being. And I think that is a really important piece that leaders and employees need to work together on. It's not about leaders taking responsibility for their employees' well-being. They need to look at the conditions that they're creating. Do they feel valued? Are they clear about what they're trying to achieve? Is the leader helping them do it and get better at it at a time that's right for them and in a way that's right for them? But ultimately, it's for each individual to manage their own well-being. And I think that's the best thing we can do as leaders, knowing that the individual knowing that they are supported.
I suppose you've got lots and lots of members now of Disruptive HR. So I just wondered, are there any particular organizations who really put a smile on your face, or you look forward to hearing from them, or who you think, actually, these guys really get what Disruptive HR is about, and they're actually living?
There are so many, Ian, but I'm not going to call out individual businesses because I don't think there's any one business that's doing it perfectly. But I think what's exciting for me is that we're seeing innovation happening in the people space in the most unlikely organizations. So it used to be perhaps a bit more dominant in the digital businesses, the smaller startup, high tech type businesses that perhaps had more millennials, whereas now we're seeing in organizations, public sector, engineering, manufacturing, old style retail. Your old sector, the housing, association, have got some fantastic examples of really innovative practices. So I don't think it's the preserve any longer of the kind of, young, trendy businesses. I think this is very much, even the most traditional businesses are waking up and beginning to experiment and do things differently.
So final question for me then, Lucy, I suppose drawing on your personal or professional experience, what one piece of advice or thoughts would you want to sort of leave viewers with in terms of how they're looking to the future now from a HR perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really tricky one, and I'm useless at coming up with one bit of advice. So this may stray into a couple, but I think that trust your gut. I know that's a kind of very kind of bland statement, but I think that, we increasingly we've got to have evidence that these things are going to work before we try them. And actually, I think, just if our leaders are asking for that, just get them to reflect on their own personal experiences. When has a performance review ever made you feel particularly motivated? When has an engagement survey ever really led to any change? When has a big diversity and inclusion program genuinely made people feel more included? And of course, the answer, when we look at our own experience as human beings in the workplace, is typically the answer is never. And actually, I think if we trust our understandings of how humans think, feel, behave, are motivated, if we look at how we interact with our families, with our kids, if we just rely more on our understanding of human beings and human nature, I think it would drive us to different answers, rather than perhaps going for something that is about compliance, or making sure people have done it, or trying to nursemaid people. I think if we treat people like adults, if we kind of base it on trust, and I think if we really go with our understanding of human beings, I think we'll see changes happen.
And that's a fantastic place to sort of finish this episode of DINCast, Lucy. It's been an absolute joy and a pleasure to be
It's been
chatting with
lovely
you.
talking to you. Thanks for having me, Ian.
Yeah, and I hope we can do some more interesting stuff in the future. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Take care now.